So before we finish our discussion for today, just a few concluding words on quantitative methods. Obviously, there are many more really cool quantitative methods that we never had the chance to discuss because we don't have much time. And they are just like new toys that you can play with because they are fun. I will not describe them in detail. I will just mention some of them that might be useful for psychologists. Canonical correlation analysis, very often used if you have two different large questionnaires, for example, and you want to find out what are the common dimensions linking their shared variance, essentially contributing to both of these questionnaires. In factor analysis, probably these questionnaires will fall into different factors, and that's why for this type of question you need canonical correlation. But if you're interested in this task, in Tabachnik and Fiedel, there is a nice chapter. Another quite cool method, which is also a good way to visualize complex data sets, is called exploratory graph analysis, which basically takes your correlation matrix and it tries to connect your variables into this kind of graph. And each variable is classified into a group of variables, which is essentially like a latent factor. And you can even, based on this graph, you can even quantify factor loadings. And these factor loadings are convergent with confirmatory factor analysis. So it's actually quite interesting and nice method, also very easy to run. In R, just this 5 lines of code produce this nice sexy diagram that you can publish in your paper. And this is also called, slightly different versions of these are also called network psychometrics. So if you're interested in this is a very new method, only appeared a couple of years ago, and there are some nice papers on this by Hector Galino and Sasha Epskamp, very interesting authors. And of course, there is a whole bunch of methods that are jointly called machine learning methods. When we try to automatically identify some kind of pattern, for example, which of the variables will be good predictors in regression, which of the predictors we should pick for our regression model. And the stupid stepwise regression that is available in SPSS does a bad job. But there are much more advanced approaches that can do this kind of regression analysis automatically for us, and still they are statistically robust and theoretically justifiable, such as a ridge regression or lasso regression. For nominal variables, we have decision trees and random forests. And there are also neural networks that can allow us to detect patterns in very complex material where we even don't know what the variables are. So neural network can extract this information for us, and it can learn to classify, for example, something. And there are many other methods. At the beginning, fundamental scientists looked at these methods a little bit skeptically because they are not based on fundamental assumptions. They are kind of ad hoc. But nowadays, in the last couple of years, also there are some really good papers arguing that these methods and these models have a place in fundamental psychological research. And if you're interested in that, I totally recommend you a more practical paper by Rosenbuch, found by Andrei Levakov, wonderful paper, and a more fundamental theoretical paper by Yarkoni and Westphal, where they discuss how and why we can apply those methods in psychology. And of course, as a final consideration, when you perform a quantitative data analysis, you always need to take a little bit of critical approach towards your own analysis. So you need to be a little bit this angry and scary reviewer too, because if you are not, reviewers can be cruel with you. So just some general suggestions. First of all, when you apply your statistical methods to your data, you always need to be aware that you need to justify that these methods are applicable to this data. And in psychology, we had situations when even very, very renowned and famous psychologists made this kind of mistake. For example, Barbara Fredrickson, the top researcher on positive emotions, she published a paper with a Brazilian mathematician, Losada, where they claimed together, based on differential equations, that the number of positive emotions or positive interactions is supposed to be 3-to-1, positive to negative. And they called it Losada ratio in order for a person or for a team to flourish. But then people scrutinized this paper and they realized that basically it made no sense to apply those differential equations because the scales based on which they did it were not ratio scales even. So it made absolutely no sense. And this was rebuked, and even Barbara Fredrickson admitted that she made a mistake. She had to, of course, the fact that you need more positive emotions than negative emotions, no one contests, but the exact ratio, is it 3-to-1 or is it maybe 2-to-1 or 4-to-1, is still an open question. Whenever you generalize your findings to a different sample, the findings that you, or the model that you developed in a particular sample, you need to verify that it works in this different situation. And another important consideration, decide on the steps of your data analysis before you start. It is a bad approach to take the data and try to tease something interesting out of it. The good approach is to start with your research questions, choose methods for these research questions, and apply those methods consistently. If you see that another method works better, it happens also sometimes. Maybe initially we were not aware of some interesting method or useful method, or we were not aware about some properties of our data which make another method more optimal. So if in the process you discover that another method works better, apply this other method, but consistently. Do not analyze one part of your data with one method and another part of your data with another method, because then it will be very huge mess. And also always start with simple methods and then proceed to complex ones. These appear to be very intuitive, but unfortunately in psychology there are so many people misapplying statistical methods that one can't help but remembering this old phrase by Joseph Stalin, who said that an attempt to fit numbers to suit some biased preconception is an act of criminal nature. And nowadays, what we are having in psychology is basically some kind of methodological revolution, where we have some methodologists like Uli Shimak or Dan Lakens or others who are really very radical, and of course they don't shoot people who do bad research, but they shoot bad research with statistics like replicability index and so on. So how can we avoid getting our research from getting shot by these methodological revolutionaries? Basically, the answer is transparency. We need to be open about our analysis. The best approach is to pre-register it if it's possible. If it's not possible, try to share your data and share your code. And of course, document all the steps of your data analysis. Document all the decisions that you made. Because then your research will be replicable. And people will not think that, oh, there is something sloppy about this study. Maybe someone played with the data a little. And here are some questions that you can ask when you look at your own data analysis. Is it theoretically based? Why did I choose this method? What are the assumptions of this method? And does my data support these assumptions? What are the potential problems with this method? And how can I prevent these problems? And sometimes you want to compare the results of different methods. For example, you apply some kind of repeated measures ANOVA, and then you just pairwise compare the groups or do some kind of simple slopes analysis, and you make sure that the results are convergent and they create a coherent picture. And of course, it makes sense to try to obtain additional evidence of validity by looking at other samples or other studies. And it's a very good idea to publish your or share your data upon request with other people, because then they can more easily build on your research, they can reuse your code, and this can save them sometimes. And in the end, psychology as a science will develop much more optimally. So thank you for your attention to this, I hope not very mind-blowing discussion. And there are, of course, some nice sources that you can read. You're very welcome. And see you next time. Bye-bye.